I'm seeing
many.
like the Wheaties packet. I'm seeing my video.
Speaker. WP audio capture.
And you've got an aviation one at the moment. If I've got the time, I can change it to railway. Or people can live with a Balkan, Bulgarian, Russian aircraft. So at 9:30, we've got to be conscious of time.
Right, can we get rid of that?
And I've got to get into the directory of which I'm going to show. So I'll do some homework. I won't worry about the cosmetics. I'm going back to homework.
All right, I'm ready to start when you are. Let's see, in the chat we've got Stephen, g'day. Jack the Railway Enthusiast says hi. Vanderbricks says hello. And Stephen says we appear to have a Rod and Floyd inception, which I've now fixed.
But now, I've got to get into tonight's presentation. Now, am I speaking to everybody at this minute?
Yes, you are.
Oh, well, greetings everybody. I've had a power outage today which has ruined all the planning. Then to a funeral, then to an aviation meeting. So this is going to be a little bit warts and all, just as if I'd had you here at home. Now.
All right, can you stop for a second, Rod?
Yep.
Because I'm just going to try and get this, where are we? Input. Okay. Talk again.
I'm in the wrong directory. I'm just getting into the right directory. I've had RBS older. Here we go. I'm getting into the right directory, and this is what I'm wanting to show as a directory. And I should now go back into Zoom, and I'm ready to share a screen. It's my Zoom, isn't it?
Yes.
So if I share this screen, you should now be seeing T402.
Yep, that I can see that, so that is good.
And everybody is seeing it.
There's a slight delay, but yep, they're seeing it now.
Good. Well, good evening, all of Floyd's friends. I offered to do this so that Floyd could spend his evening studying for his degree, and of course, he's still here because he's got to run it. So,
well, you saved me time setting it, having to bugger eyes around setting up a topic and everything. So
right,
it has been successful.
Right. So remember, I'm now 70, 72, 73. I'm not counting. I'm taking you back to when I was a young enthusiast. I gain the impression most of Floyd's viewers are his own age group. And this is what we could do 50 years ago when we were young people. We had a lot more freedom, a lot more things we could see. And the important message tonight is go out and grab what you can when you can. So I'd come from an extensive railway background in my younger days with family. I'd been to North Queensland, I'd been to South Australia. This was my early days as a young adventurer for myself. And this is my first all lines ticket, which was a great thing for a Victorian railway enthusiast. I was not the first person to buy one or use one. And so here I am in Albury, the first day of my all lines ticket in 1967. And this was a day when an enthusiast tour had taken an R to Albury, a New South Wales loco to Culcairn, and they were going to pace the daylight back to Melbourne with their steam loco. Well, I booked on the daylight. We are jumping. This is again, if you think about it, a colour slide in that era cost us 20 cents. That's the equivalent of $3 per photo today, and I was rationing. These are a little bit out of sequence, and I haven't scanned them all. That is Pinaroo. If you can see the photo, I think you can see the caption as well.
They might just have to be on a bigger screen. I don't know how big people's screens are that they're watching it on, but yeah, if you want to read out the caption, go for it.
Righto. Now, this was the last day of my All Lines ticket. I'd spent it catching the last of steam. I was younger than the many people who inspired me, and while they'd seen steam in its peak, and that was the ethos of being a rail fan in that era, see steam, I'd gone to Pinaroo. I was only 17. My parents were away. I could do anything I wanted to do, but to sign the VR indemnities, I had to have an adult sign, and luckily my uncle worked in head office. This was the only train for the whole fortnight that wanted to see my indemnity, and it was the only train for the whole fortnight that wasn't listed. I didn't know it existed. So I'd gone on what would become the Vinelander, just the overnight train to Mildura, got the connecting rail motor from Oyen to Pinaroo, and found this waiting there. I came back on this. Geelong Loco Depot and F still in red. There weren't many in red. They were for the passenger shunting, I think, at Spencer Street. Most of them were black. Now, I'll have to backtrack you because of the way my imaging is working. It does it in saving order, not in date order. So I've now got to go, right, here we go. That's Oyen Loco Depot. Tail end of steam. Also Oyen. Same day. Those are the only ones I've scanned. That was coming in on the freight into the final curve into Oyen. Now that's the Victoria. Now I can try changing directory while you're watching, but I think I have to stop screen sharing to change the directory and screen share again. And this is the moment for you all to ask questions through Floyd. And so we'll use this break for questions. The next segment will be much longer, but I'll break it halfway. Right, now here we go. Can I change screen?
So somebody asked, Jack said, I didn't think you were doing any live streams again until December, Floyd. That was the plan, and Rod offered to do this special Zoom one, which I thought sounded great because it meant that I didn't have to do too much. And so, yeah, here we are. This is only going to be a one night thing unless Rod wants to put on another live show in 2 weeks. But yeah, that's the plan.
Right now.
One question, Patrick Robertson says, the train line through Pinaroo isn't in use, is it? It is in use from Oyen to Murrayville, and it is out of use from Murrayville to Pinaroo and through to, where does it connect on the South Australian side?
Well, Pinaroo goes through to Tailem Bend.
Tailem Bend, that's it.
Out of use. It got converted to standard gauge, and then the grain people stopped using rail for transport. Sorry, I'm just trying to find my... It
was converted to standard gauge, and so there was a break of gauge, and now, of course, Murrayville has been converted to standard gauge, but I think the section from Murrayville to Pinaroo is still disused broad gauge.
That could well be true. Now, my screen is showing the start of the next segment. The question is, are you seeing it?
No.
Right. That means I think I have to stop the screen share and start again. I've done this with other meetings now. The question is, meeting controls. I haven't got a button for stopping the screen share. Zoom. There's only 2 Zoom windows, but the next one can take us right through till the end of this evening. We're at 9:43 right now. I'm trying to keep this one to 40 minutes, and I do then have another 40 minutes for 2 weeks' time. Right. Why am I not able to stop the screen sharing and restart it? I'm getting the same window for both. You are. New share. Here we go. Right. Are you seeing a red miniature loco SMR?
Yes.
Right. So we're in business.
Looks like it.
Right. So I was going to, there was a whole lot of stuff I was going to give to the viewers. All lines tickets were wonderful for young railway enthusiasts. Unlimited travel for a period of time. So my Victorian one, where you saw only a smattering, was 2 weeks. The Queensland one was for 1 month. And so I'm on my way from Melbourne to Brisbane. I've spent a couple of days with friends before I started, and they took me to the Gold Coast for the day. And this is Currumbin Bird Sanctuary. Now, we are going to zigzag. As I say, the software I'm using to show you tonight is a warts and all, which doesn't show in file order. So the captions will be coming in, I'll be ad-libbing as I see them. Winton on the Midlander, turning on the triangle, which in Queensland they call a fork. Captioned on the frame, Rockhampton, taken through a door. That's now preserved in the foyer of the modern Rockhampton railway station. But in that era, it was still used for railway inspections. Ingham. Now, this was the declining days of steam. Much of Queensland had been dieselised already. So this area was no longer steam, but the facilities had not been removed. And my first aim, having travelled from Melbourne to Brisbane, Brisbane to Cairns, I went to Forsyth, which interestingly you can still do today. Savannah goes there. This is Mount Surprise on classic Queensland rail motor of the era, which bus technology, but they weren't bus chassis. Very common around the world for an early rail motor. You have the engine at the front, single axle at the rear with a driving train like a road vehicle, and a bogie at the front to carry the engine's weight. Same again, very typically Queensland, particularly that water tank. And these little tea stalls, this one was out of use, but they were dotted all over Queensland, but the era for using them had passed. A lot of Queensland railways survived because the roads could be impassable in the wet. So lots of people used the railway. But bit by bit, the roads were becoming passable. Oh, we are jumping. A rare Queensland clerestory carriage. They were built for suburban traffic, weren't regarded as too heavy for that, were rebuilt into lots of rolls. That one is a sleeping car. There we are. Those bays to the left, they were 6-berth, second-class sleeping cabins when it was running as a vehicle, but here it's just a storeroom at the workshops. None of these slides has been prepared for presentation. I am simply showing you what's on my hard drive as a quick and convenient evening to relieve Floyd while he's facing exams. I think I've got the history of that conversion. Like so many railway systems, redundant carriages get converted as camp wagons for railway workers. Classic coal stage, that one is, should be Mariba, yep. Already, of course, an area that's lost its steam locos. No need for a coal stage. And the sorted rail motors are connecting down there at Mariba Station. I joined one of them. Another, now, I still have a carriage specialty. So in my scanning of this holiday, I wasn't doing a representative selection. I was doing photos for specialty groups. Now that one's an interesting rail motor. It has proper draw gear. So it may have spent its time on Croydon to Normanton. This is a Relief Sunlander, on which I had a most adventurous ride, which I won't describe tonight. Mixed rolling stock. The 1400s were the 12-cylinder GM. I think they were A1A, not Coco. That was a rarity for QR. It ran the Innisfail tramway, which was 610mm gauge sugar tramway, but it was run by the Government Railway, not independently, and that's a carriage from when it had passenger services. Okay, more equipment on the 610mm there. And you've got the narrow gauge on the right. Those timbers must be sleepers. I was there, of course, in January, which is off-season for sugar, but when they were running maintenance trains to get the track properly into shape for the next sugar season. Railway man, they shouted me. I was 18 in 18? Yes, I'd turned 18 in Victoria. I could drink in a Victorian pub, but Queensland was 21. Anyway, I didn't even look 18. These railway workers invited me into the railway bar at Innisfail, and we had a most pleasant session. One of 3 built for Sunshine Express in the 1930s, which the completion of the railway to Cairns was either 1928 or early 1930s, and then it boomed as a tourism route, particularly for southerners, escaping Melbourne winters for Queensland sunshine. That's when the marketing term sunshine route was coined. Mackay, this should have been a rail motor. The rail motor was unavailable, so we had a small steam loco and 1 carriage out to Netherdale. So say that's the that glimpse of bridge on the right was how they incorporated Townsville Station into the through North Coast route, where they'd all been built as port to hinterland railways, and somehow they had to get through south to north trains through all these existing stations. So that balloon loop was built and that bridge. I think that's Mackay, yeah. I was trying desperately to get shots of Mackay dining room for a specialist group. Another of the 3 dining cars. 30 seats. I spoke to one of the stewardesses on the air-conditioned trains that had replaced these, and she said, we loved those old diners. They were so rough that if a gentleman was giving you lip, you could spill soup all over him and make it look like a real accident. Ooh, where are we? Mackay, something shunting. The C-17 was a bit like a Victorian K. I'm never sure who's watching these viewings. Ubiquitous, do anything, go anywhere. Double-headed C-17s hauled the Midlander. A very useful and long-lived loco. Of course, Queensland had Garretts, and I was a Garrett devotee ever since being a young Victorian going to Weaprowana. The third of the 3 dining cars. Right, now we've now jumped to when this one appeared in the book Railway Hotels of Australia. That's the Midland. I was there. There'd been 7 years of drought and the country around was bleak. Floyd has been to Winton as part of his Grand Queensland adventure.
Very briefly. I was there for all of half an hour. I think it was about an hour that I was there, but there was just enough time to photograph the railway station, maybe a photo of the pub and leave.
And when I was there, you were warned not to drink the Winton water. It was bore water, reeked of sulphur. Even the stainless steel urinals in the station had corroded with that level of sulphur. Anyway, I bought some soft drink and it tasted the same sulphur. And the local said, Winton's a very progressive place. We even bottle our own soft drinks. Sorted, supposedly suburban carriages converted for camp wagon use. I do contribute to a group, world group, which specialises in clerestory carriages. Some of these are duplicates, of course. You're seeing now, that one was the interesting one. Like a lot of railways that go to remote places in Australia, this one was the maternal and child welfare carriage. And we had a lot of these different systems for different purposes. And she was a lovely lady. I was doing this holiday on the cheap. I was doing all of my meals was tinned steak and veg from the supermarket, heated on my camp stove. The lovely lady heated it for me on her kitchen. And we were travelling on the cross-country link from Winton to Hewenden that night. I was back in the Compo car van at the back, and her carriage was attached. New South Wales ran dental clinics. Commonwealth Railways ran a community service car. This was railroading in that's my comment for another country. This was the way that railways were in Australia.
Victoria, we had the medical vision and test car.
Yep.
Similar theme.
Well, that wasn't for the community, that was for railwaymen themselves. But yes,
Right.
we had similar. Western Australia did. New South Wales ran complete mobile dental clinics. Now, the second carriage is probably the one to bring to your audience tonight. Queensland was on a weight-saving campaign and ran a lot of these funny composite brake van cum special wagons. So that's a combined brake van and cattle wagon. The carriages was a pretty prolific type. They were called Davisons. They were all over the place. Now that one's a real antique. I've written that up, I think, for some other publication. That is quite old. I think it's an original Great Northern Railway carriage when Queensland was 3 separate railways. And I did a lot of travelling. That's a much more modern one, but pretty basic. But I did a lot of travelling in those. As a uni student with no money, I would try and sleep overnight in a train every night for the whole month. That's Hewenden under demolition again. The steam era had ended. I was 6 years behind my inspirations. They'd been here as young adventurers when they were in their young 20s. They'd seen it in action with steam. Well, I was tail end. Now that's interesting. I've done this one for a specialty group. That's a Grover bogie, designed to be self-steering to minimise rail wear and flange wear. So those cross links were supposed to help one axle guide the other axle. South Africa had Grover bogies. I don't know who else did. Just pause while you digest and try and understand the mathematics. In fact, I think the left linkage is broken. The wheel is at a much more acute angle than it should be.
I think that's the bogie itself that's broken.
Right. Yes, well, see, it's a single axle. It's not really a bogie. But of course, it's on its side and derelict anyhow. They didn't tip it over just so that I could take a photo. It's the Mount Isa coal stage. You'll notice, compared with ones we might know, much taller, and hence they were all drop into the bin and then drop into the wagon. Queensland had 4 that were similar height, but site constraints meant that they were much shorter, and they used cable haulage to take the wagons to the top. I can't think where in Victoria got to that height. I think North Melbourne did. Again, a Floyd audience is Australia-wide and possibly worldwide. We're not purely Victorian.
There's at least one Queenslander in here. And I haven't seen anyone who I recognise as international, but I know there is a regular viewer who's from the USA.
Right. And of course, they can be watching this on its recorded version.
Yep.
Again, a Davison that we've seen before. That was the express freight which ran from Townsville to Mount Isa on the nights when Inlander didn't. And Inlander was only 2 nights a week. It was express in the sense that it never shunted, but it stopped at every railway refreshment room or every town with a pub, and the passengers got another dozen. I think there were stubbies in that era. We were rolling on the floor when we reached Mount Isa, or at least the others were. the BGV. You'll notice cars on the flat wagons. I'm not sure where they're going, but Queensland did a lot of private car transport because the roads were so horrible. That era has vanished. You'll notice the sunshades over the windows, common only in northern Queensland, but very common on Commonwealth railways before there was air conditioning. And I think that's a carriage which has a double roof. So again, there was an air gap between the upper roof and the ceiling. That was insulation. Victoria did the same. Lots of systems did the same. So you appreciate a lot of my scanning has been done for carriage groups. That's an interesting one, that end. I think that's one of 3 vans built with the Sunshine Express profile, which became the Sunlander profile, but in steel. I'd have to do more homework. And there's the classic Queensland KKB. 2 compartments. One of them is for the guard, the other is for the drovers escorting the cattle. Ooh, DAS, yes. Pullman layout. Built, I think, mainly for the southern service, the Southern Mail and the Southwestern Mail, which would have been your interstate travel to via Wallangarra to Sydney. Cairns, as I say, the problem is the software I'm using jumps all over the place within the directory. Classic T-stall, although it was no longer serving anything. That's on the Collinsville line out of Townsville, since extended. I got back there on a fan trip, which was aiming to go the whole way to Newlands Mine, and we got stopped halfway. There'd been a breakdown of a coal train ahead of us. We never got to the far end. But we were stopped at a station which had a mango tree. The passengers filled their bags with mangoes, and then we went back again. CW74, that's the third of the 3 diners. You've seen the whole lot now. That one was converted to be a camp wagon. One of them is preserved and is run by ARHS Queensland in charter trips. Ooh. Townsville, when it still had the overall roof. That got demolished. Queensland had a lot of those because of tropical rain, and when it falls, you can appreciate why they had them. And there was that horrible 1960s building, complete mismatch with the original 1890s. Right, a couple of garrets coming up. I did all of these when Britishers were celebrating the centenary of the birth of Mr. Garrett himself. And of course, Australia had the world's first Garrett. 2 narrow gauge Ks built for Tasmania. So I did a whole lot of scanning then to pass to the people in Manchester who were organising the centenary celebrations. Now that roof line is interesting. That was built as one of 3 observation cars. Got withdrawn and converted to ordinary sitting. One of these survived very nicely into the preservation era, but then it needed a boiler replacement and nobody was going to fund it. So it's been out of use now for over 10 years. Queensland was one of the unsuccessful users of the Australian Standard Garret, but these Garrets did a very good job and were still running in 1968, but I never saw one moving. At that stage, they were down to just coal trains between Rockhampton and Gladstone, but I was there on the wrong days of the week. I photographed one of them in Rockhampton and photographed it again in Gladstone, but didn't see it moving. I'm not sure how many of these there were. I think 20 or 24. I think there were 6 slots of forecast sets built. Pretty good for their era, I suppose. And the Commonwealth Engineering Design, I think. Those of you who follow all of Australia may recognise the similarities with the NDHs built for Commonwealth Railways. Looks like Mackay. This was the day I actually travelled to Netherdale on this steam train replacing a rail motor. That's a PB15, which was their Light Lines passenger loco. And in Queensland terms, that was just like the D3 did for Victoria. Of course, that whole Mackay station is now nothing. The railway was rejigged to bypass the city with an out-of-town station. So that's the same train at Marani Island platform. The Mackay Railway was mainly a cane hauler, and while it's closed as a Queensland branch, several sections have been converted to sugarcane gauge and are under the control of the relevant mills. Going round the triangle at Netherdale. You're getting these doubled because I've just given you the whole directory. Those hats, which are called a tope, a tropical hat, that was universal for a station master in Queensland. Oh, gosh, that's junction out of Mackay, Paget. When I was coming southbound on a late-running relief Sunlander, the main Sunlander, which was waiting for the platform at Mackay, was sitting there backed up on the branch line for us to get out of Mackay so it could go in. Now that's an unusual slip car. I'm not sure what it was designed to do. It was a composite. fact, this Mackay station be a 1920s, built as part of creating the Brisbane to Cairns through route. The original was a spur into the heart of town. Now, that was a composite vehicle. You'll notice the folding signboard. You could change the designation of a compartment. So that one could be sitting or could be sleeping. They just fold the label according to how they were using it tonight, which was quite common in Queensland, that style. Because very famous is Rockhampton, is the running up Denison Street. It is not the main street of Rockhampton, it's a back street. It's a bit like going up Latrobe Street instead of Flinders Street. And it was double track in that era, but it's now single track. But it is still the main North Coast Railway. That's the old Rockhampton station. The new one was built on the other side of the yard.
Shall we break for some comments soon?
Yes, look, I'm quite happy to break when you are. Now,
all right, well, we'll break now.
Yep. Good suggestion, Boyd. You're the organiser. Yep.
Because we've got a few comments that have come in.
I have no idea how far we are. No,
so Stephen says 1009 is the preserved QR Garrett. He also says luckily TGR K1 still survives in the UK. We've had a bit of we've got Fuse Tech and CSX Gaming, who looks like Fuse Tech is a fan of CSX. Nothing relevant to say though. Stephen was referring to a classic story. I'm not sure which one he was referring to then. It was a little while ago.
How about the Sunlander arriving in Cairns on time?
Yes, that's a classic story. The train man says this is fantastic stuff. Vandenbrick says lovely little rail motor. I think that was the first one you showed. Gordon Ross says, "G'day Floyd and Roderick, thanks for this. Love the content, especially Queensland Government Railways." And that's... Stephen was referring to the stewardess, the story of the stewardess.
Oh yeah, and how to spill food over gentlemen, yeah. In fact, there's another half to that one. Those windows were openable, and people who didn't like their meal could push the window down and casually discard the meal out the window.
For those who don't know, do you want to tell the story of the Sunlander arriving into Cairns on time?
Oh, who's going to quote it?
You.
Right. Well, the Sunlander was notorious for its late running, and finally it got into Cairns on time. The town couldn't believe it. They flocked down to the station, they grabbed the crew and headed to the pub across the road and started celebrating. After several drinks, the guard's conscience got the better of him, and he said, "You realise we weren't on time. This was yesterday's train." And I had a similar situation. I came in from Mount Isa and I was stuck in the goods yard in Townsville, and the Sunlander I was wanting to catch to Cairns left without me. I was stuck in the goods yard. Don't worry, there was another one 1 hour later. I had seen the preceding day's train 23 hours late. That was floods.
Well, there's a similar story of the GAN arriving into Alice Springs on time, and it just so happened to be 1 month late.
Yep. And there's also, I think the GAN was once stranded for 3 weeks in Central Australia, and I don't know how they all survived, but certainly there were staff versus passenger cricket matches adjacent to the train. They must have had an aerial drop of food. The worst I've ever been late, I think, was 24 hours, and I've done that in Queensland and other countries. My southbound, the photo I showed you much earlier, I was joining the relief at Mackay, I think, at Innisfail, one of those. We were running several hours late, so Mackay, which should have been the lunch stop, I think was the breakfast stop, and St Lawrence dining room was switched in for dinner. They didn't run normally, only when trains were late, and they did a brilliant job. So we were there for 25 minutes, we got a 3-course dinner, and the train continued. But it's all been demolished. Well, let's kick on. I'm not sure how far we are through this segment. Let's keep going, and then we'll have more questions at the end. So everybody's seeing everything, Floyd? We're in gear?
Yep.
Right, so you should be seeing a composite sleeping car on the Monto line. I think, yes, that's at Monto.
Yes, everyone can see that.
Right. So the first class berths were double bunks, that's one above another. Second class was, in most carriages, was triple bunk, but there were some 6s in Queensland, not common in Australia at all, but common in other parts of the world.
Can you still find 6-berth sleepers running in the world?
Oh yeah, China. You can get 8 berths as well in India and most of those countries. You'll still get 6-berth couchettes in Europe. They're phasing them out. Africa, you'll get 6-berth couchettes. It's South Africa, Zimbabwe. Where are we now? Dirranbandi. So say it's a taxing time for me tonight because they're not showing in holiday sequence. That's the 8-cylinder General Motors, same mechanics as a VRT, but on 6-wheel bogies to preserve the track. As a result, Queensland tracks survived and Victorian tracks disintegrated. I think that line is suspended beyond somewhere now. So much has gone in this world. So the important thing for the younger generation watching this is you've just got to do what you can when you can. You may not be able to do it when you're much older. You'll notice I mentioned before those flaps. You could change the designation of a compartment just by changing the flap. Of course, if you were converting it from second to sleeper, you lowered the bunks and put bedding onto them. Oh, that was an effort for high-speed rail parcels traffic. Toowoomba from Brisbane is the same as a Melbourne to Bendigo. It was 4 hours by train and 90 minutes by car. The railway was doomed. And of course, they're trying to unscramble that with all of the inland rail proposals, and I don't think they're going to unscramble it. Back to Garrett's. The maroon has faded. They were a quite rich maroon, a very stylish loco, and a very good loco.
I believe the Garrett 1009 is now displayed at the Ipswich Museum.
Highly likely.
It wasn't on display when I was there. It was in storage at another part of the workshops. I might have seen it through a gap in a door or something like that, but I believe it's now officially on display.
Right.
Because there's no realistic hope of getting someone to pay for a boiler replacement.
That is sad. That's the world we live in today, folks. The BB18 1/4 was Queensland's pride and joy express passenger loco. Its specs weren't really much greater than our D3. And they were built until quite late in the piece, and I think the last steam loco built for a government railway was one of these. Very late 1950s, or maybe even to 62. I may be confusing that with the last Brisbane trams. Whatever, there are I think 2 of these in preservation and still run tours today.
And a classic example of the funky QR class scheme.
Oh yes, so yes, I never know how much people know already and how much people don't. The Queensland coding scheme was classic A, B, C, did they get to D, for the number of driving wheels. And then the figure was the cylinder diameter in inches. That's why it's 18 1/4. It predated Harry Potter by several years. And the BB was because there was a preceding B, 18 1/4, as we have here. The BB had modern refinements, including roller bearing wheels and SCOAP wheels, which were a feature of a Floyd quiz months ago. The North Coast line skirted Maryborough, didn't go in, but for years they ran a little shuttle train between the city station and the junction station. And again, Queensland was great for recycling numbers. So the number on a loco or a carriage gave really no indication about its history. They weren't grouped or batched. So at the end of my 1 month on a Queensland All Lines ticket, I stayed with family friends in Brisbane and did a lot of local things, including the trams, to finish off my holiday. Now here we are, jumping right back to the earliest days of the holiday. The DLs ran the Forsyth line because it was so lightly laid, a mainline diesel couldn't go there. They got 4 of these and they could run in multiple. They had Gardner engines, same as we had in our rail motors in Victoria. And that was the classic way of running them, 3 on a train with 1 reserve. And 2 of them, I think all of them are preserved, and 2 of them are mobile, 2 of them are static. And the line got upgraded as far as Mount Surprise for the 60-tonne diesel electric locos. That's their light lines diesel, equivalent to a VRY, but of course on 6-wheel bogies to spread the load. Bullock Creek. I was on the rail motor, this was what we were crossing, so I took the chance to get the photos. It's what helped that line survive for so long. And miraculously, somebody's paying the money to let Savannah Lander run. Yes,
the Forsyth line is still technically under QR control.
Yep.
Yet the Savannah-Lander is the only train which runs there. But theoretically, somebody could book a cattle train to Mareeba or something, and Queensland Rail would say, "Yep, no worries."
Yep.
Not that will happen,
And
but
out of Australia's famous trains for a world audience, the one I recommend to everybody, go on Savannah-Lander. Forget about the overpriced Gurn. Forget about the overpriced Union Pacific. Get onto Savannah-Lander. This one is interesting. It's called the Flying Flea. The Western Line branched. You could go to Cunnamulla, which is where Westlander went, or to Quilpie. And Quilpie always complained they produced more revenue than Cunnamulla and didn't get the train. So one carriage got removed at Charleville, and then they built a generator car, because these carriages were head-end power. They built a generator car which also had a refrigerated compartment, and so they ran just this one carriage to Quilpie as the Flying Flea. In fact, the motor that's in that generator van is out of a scrap rail motor. It's Quilpie itself. Two versions of the one. Detail or arty-farty silhouette. Somewhere in the ranges. I don't think we're far off the end. I think our break was at the 2/3, 1/3 level. Now that one is not just nice to see the steam locos. I put this one up to a motor car group, classic Holden FJ, and that's a Skoda. Polish, Czechoslovakian, one or the other. And so set warts and all screening, you're getting two versions of lots of the photos, the master large and the web version small. I think Harlaxton is where you actually crossed the ridge of the Great Dividing Range, and Toowoomba itself feeds the Darling and Murray rivers via a series of creeks and other rivers. And there you are, almost in viewing distance of Brisbane, and you are in the upper Murray. Fork, of course, was the Queensland name for a triangle, which other systems called a Y. You've got to be up with the lingo when you cater for a world audience. I think that's a cascaded sleeping car running. That's a CAS running as a sitting car. No, in my zigzagging, no. But for those who've never been there, it was always a wonderful adventure for a Victorian. It was a different world. That's a special car. I'm not sure, but I think it was converted from a first-class sitting car. I've got a plan somewhere. I've posted this to a specialty group with some details. Classic car van behind a classic Queensland long distance train. Oh, and there's
Oh,
Fallon.
hang on. Hang on, Rod. Stream has dropped out.
All right. We're not far from the end, Floyd. We may as well revive. We can revive it and finish, or we can start at this point in 2 weeks' time.
I'm trying to figure out why it's stalled.
Right, so this is you now feeding into YouTube.
Yes.
And YouTube doesn't have a time limit.
No. Oh, okay, it's back. I think it was just silliness on my end.
Do you want me to backtrack a couple of frames?
Yeah, that'd be good. It might have just been on my end that it was being funky. Stephen said it was fine on his end.
Right, so I've now dropped only a few frames. As I said, it was a bit of a rough as guts tonight. I have not prepared this specially. You're seeing me warts and all. But as a gift to Floyd, as thanks for all of his previous efforts and preparations, something that helps him free up his time for his studies, while keeping the rest of you all still in the loop. So we're at Fallon. That is a suburban train indicator at a country station. Can you... Just something like that at Manangatang. That's a very distinctive station. Lots of people post photos of that to all sorts of websites, but that little ventilated dovecote, whatever it is, gives away that that's Dirranbandi. And for those who haven't read the whole poem, one stanza. Iron rations come in handy on the way to Dirranbandi. That's part of a very major poem. Queensland Range, very famous engineering, and when you think about when it was built, very significant engineering for a state with not much money, trying to do everything, just as significant as the crossing of the Blue Mountains was for New South Wales, or crossing to Bendigo was for Victoria, or reaching Murray Bridge for South Australia. They were very significant engineering in their day. Oh, Gladstone has to be. Yes. And of course, a natural deep water port and a major coal export port today. So you'll see, this is an uncleaned photo. There's fuzz all over it. This is a warts and all tonight. Now that's the interesting one for steam addicts. That was the only one of that class ever built, a C19. And I think it hauled a royal train back in its day. It's a bit like Heavy Harry was for Victoria. This is the most important locomotive the system owns, so we will put it onto the royal train. A modern, that's a 1935 version of the 1920s streamlined front. Makes it go faster. Same mechanicals. It must have been fairly new at the time. I think they got 4. They had 1 in each division. Not bad going for Queensland's restricted loading gauge. That one's was just in use as a sitting car that day. And that's a suburban car, and it's in its suburban car layout. There's a few of them preserved, used on tourist trains out of Brisbane. Oh my gosh, we're jumping. Bibura is back between Cairns and Forsyth. So the fatter trailer is a 1930s modern version. Oh dear. That's a 2000 class rail motor at Kuranda. I can memorise it. I couldn't salvage it. And finally, towards the end, after 31 days touring Queensland, I had 1 week staying in Brisbane with friends, so I caught up with trams and local trains and the like. In fact, only 11 months later, I was back in Brisbane for the last trams on the north side routes. But that will make a separate exercise. We won't do them tonight. On this occasion, I was lucky. 2 of the places I visited on these few days had closed before mine. Oh, we're near the end, very near the end. Coming home, I'd had a great 5 weeks, 6 weeks. And so I left Brisbane. This is South Grafton Loco Depot on my way home, when it still had 2 oil-burning 59 class locos as shunters. Oh, yeah, but of course we're not showing in sequence. Oh, we certainly aren't. Babinda Mill. And it was so overgrown, I spent 30 minutes bashing down that long grass so I could get a photo angle. Oh gosh, we're into the current. That's Serena Plain Creek Mill, quite a vintage diesel, that one. It's a Fowler. That's a Comminge, which is fairly new at the time. The classic, and we may not see. Oh, again, I had to spend time bashing down that long grass. I wasn't worried about snakes. I was too young to even think that there might be snakes. I wanted the photo.
Well, the stomping probably scared off any snakes that were around.
Yeah. That was the old Calliope River Bridge, 1890s, I think 1898. It had been replaced for heavier axle loads, but that was part of... now, the Calliope River is between Gladstone and Rockhampton, I think, which is why it was 1898. It was part of bringing the railway to Rockhampton. 1903, there's the date. And that's back to the CAS. That's a classic Pullman berth sleeping car because it's just in use as a day sitter on this occasion. Ah! And that is the end for tonight. At 10:42, you've done well, folks. Now, if I stop screen sharing, we'll see each other or something.
Yeah, I think so.
Right now, it doesn't let me stop sharing. There it is. It's the red button. Right, I've stopped sharing that screen. I can see Floyd. You can see me with an aeroplane because I'm not
Yes.
bringing up a railway background. We can now relax and finish the last questions. It was a late start, so it's a late finish.
There's not too much. Jay says Bandylander was a great train to travel on. And then FuseTech says everyone loves Canadian Pacific.
Oh, that's only for next year's Floyd exams. I've got Canadian Pacific, but following this, from my young uni days, I've got Western Australia, another major holiday like this Queensland one, and I've got New South Wales, not much scanned. But yeah, I can fill in any time when Floyd has run out of time or inspiration.
You could definitely do 2 weeks' time. I'm still definitely around in 2 weeks' time. 2 weeks after that, so 4 weeks from now, I may be still away, or I might be. I'd have to see how I was going the day before.
Yep, well,
Because I've got plans to travel to the Mallee during that time. Although that should be the day that I'm returning.
yeah, well, I can host Zoom in my own right, but tonight's technology worked well, which I worried about. You may not realise, folks, but I had the power out for most of the day today. Floyd and I did not have the chance to rehearse. It just had to be right on the night. First try had to be right, and it was.
I had to get a bit of software set up on my end so that I could. The main issue for me was the audio. I already had the screen sharing stuff set up, but to plumb the audio through is I had to install a bit of extra software, but thankfully that was relatively easy.
Well, I feel it's worked well after I've had a very hectic day. I can relax, and I just hope, I don't know how old the people are who are viewing. There's only a couple, I think, who are my vintage who knew it from that era, and so many of you. It's an eye-opener. So, when Floyd
I know Gordon Ross, who's in the chat, he's spent some time working in Cloncurry.
Oh, wonderful. Which got a write-up in one of the newspaper travel logs recently as not quite see Australia while it's hot. That's a slogan that's gone before. But yeah, see the real remote Australia. Go to Cloncurry.
Stephen says, great photos, Rod. And Gordon Ross says, fascinating images. Thanks again, guys.
Right, I was pleased to do this. And remember, our host Floyd is facing exams, and I think some of the younger members are too. I'd never say good luck. It's what you put in through the year.
Well, I know the train man is facing Year 12 exams.
So, train man has had year English already?
I would say so, given that's what's happened with VC, although I'm not entirely up to date with VC.
Yeah. It does fade. It's just everything there is right now, and in 1 year's time, it'll be nothing.
Or even 6 months. 6 months is what it takes to get into a uni course, and once that's happened, then yeah, your Year 12 results are no longer relevant.
Yeah. But you have to go through it. It's what's called a rite of passage. Oh dear, no philosophy. It is 10:40 p.m. So, thanks to Floyd for putting up all the technology for tonight. I enjoyed showing off some of my own younger days. All I can say is you can't do things as I did. They're not there anymore. You can't do them, but do what you can do.
Right, well, I guess we'll end it there.
Righto, good night to all.
Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll do the same sort of thing in 2 weeks' time. I posted the link very late tonight because it was my sister's birthday, and we went out for dinner, and I drove back from the city with the empty light showing on my car's fuel tank, and I could have stopped, but petrol is quite expensive everywhere, so I wanted to make it to Costco Moorabbin to get cheap fuel, and I did, but it just meant that I got home a bit late. But it all worked out in the end, so that's the main thing. Righto.
It's my Zoom and you're streaming. Who ends it?
Well, I'll end the stream and then I'll say goodbye to you on Zoom. Righto. See you everyone on the stream. See you for what was initially unplanned, but is planned now 2 weeks' time. And one last thing before I go, I discovered an hour ago now that I am now able to make community posts onto YouTube. Previously, if I wanted to make any announcements to my YouTube, I had to go through Instagram, and of course not all my viewers are on Instagram. So now I'll post to both. I'll post the update to the YouTube community post. You can access those by clicking on my channel name and then going to the community tab. That's where you'll find the messages, or sometimes it'll show up in your feed. But yeah, that'll just be a way that I can put out information wherever it's relevant. So, yep, that's it from me, and see you all in 2 weeks' time.